Hello everyone, this is Dr. SHIVA Ayyadurai. Sorry I was a little bit late, but as promised, I wanted to do a educational session. I'll be doing one now as time for 11 a.m. and again at 7 p.m. And it's really for everyone, but I actually wanted to invite the New Jersey legislators, both the Assembly and the Senate. I was down there on Monday, some of you may know, to really support the movement there for truth, freedom, and health, because people are recognizing that the discourse and the legislation that's come up on vaccines is really not about vaccines, but it's about something much deeper, which is really about the attack on freedom, the denial of science, and therefore the denial of health. And if you don't have healthy people, you can't really fight for freedom. So what I wanted to do is I hope there are legislators who have taken time today to come. Anyone can ask questions. If you're on Twitter, you can just literally post a question on here, and I will attempt to answer it to the best of my ability. But what I wanted to do was really lay out the framework when I talk about truth, freedom, and health, and how these things are connected. Many of you may know that when I share the science or share my views on things, I really always bring it back to a systems approach to understanding things. And a systems approach says that the ankle bone is connected to the foot bone. Things are connected, and truth actually emerges as we use the scientific method to understand not only the parts of some phenomenon we're looking at, but also to understand the interconnections. And from those interconnections, we can start getting closer to what's actually going on. But it's really understanding these interconnections. So as a part of this, what I thought I would do is first really talk to you about truth, freedom, and health itself as a system. So if you look at this diagram here, it's taken me probably quite a bit of time to really articulate this in a very simple way. But basically, let's begin on the bottom left there of your screen, which is freedom. The reason freedom is extremely important is because it is from freedom, through the freedom to discourse, through the freedom to debate, that we actually have the opportunity to apply the scientific method and systems thinking to discover the truth. So what I mean by that is freedom really means as much people can participate in a conversation, as many people can give their views, and we have vigorous debate and vigorous discourse without censorship. And that process allows us to execute the scientific method and systems thinking. So what do I mean by that? So the scientific method, if you recall from, if you were 7th, 8th grade, if you took your first science course, begins like this. You have a phenomenon that you see in the natural world, and that's called an observation. And from that observation, the goal is you want to understand that observation, so you don't really know why that phenomenon is happening. Let's say you see an apple fall from a tree. So you may come up with your guess. And that guess may be that there's something called the Earth, which has a gravitational force which pulls that apple down. And you may actually take a guess at describing that force. Now, in order to validate or verify what you're doing, the guess, by the way, is the second step in the scientific method. It's called a hypothesis, or a guess in layman's terms. You then go execute a series of experiments. So these experiments are done to get data. You get that data, you organize that data, some people call it data mining. The measurement process takes place, and then you mine that data, and from the mining of that data, you then create what's called a model, or a mathematical formula typically, and that formula expresses the interaction, in this case, let's say, of the Earth to that apple. And that may be some equation. And you check if that equation that you're seeing from your data matches what your original guess was. And if it doesn't match your guess, as Richard Feynman once said, it doesn't matter how good looking you are, what family background you're coming in from, you're just simply wrong. And you go back to the drawing board. So anyway, that's the scientific method. So when you look at this diagram here, when I say you need freedom, which means the open discourse, you need to be able to actively question someone of their data, that's the exercising of the scientific method. But I've also added something else here. The scientific method also requires a systems approach to seeing that, as I mentioned, the ankle bone is connected to the foot bone, that things are interconnected. So bottom line is, we need freedom to exercise the scientific method and system thinking to arrive at what we call the truth. Now, why is the truth important? Well, the truth is important because from the truth, we can actually identify real problems from which we can innovate real solutions for our health. So this step is important because once you understand, what's actually going on, how the ankle bone's connected to the foot bone, what the mechanics of things are, you can say, in this very complex system, that is actually the real problem. And in order to solve that real problem, we will now use our ability to be creative and innovative, and we will figure out a solution for that real problem. Not a fake problem, not a fake solution, but for the real problem. And from that process, we then can innovate things for not only the health of our physical body, but the health of our infrastructure. Maybe the bridges are falling apart, as we know here in Massachusetts, the third worst infrastructure in the country. The healthcare system, maybe we can identify what the real problem is. Maybe in the educational and research system, we can identify what the real problem is. That infrastructure we can fix. Perhaps we can actually look at what the real problem is in the infrastructure of digital rights and freedom, why some people are able to converse through Google and Facebook and other people get shut down. So that's why this step is extremely important, because we need to actually understand the truth. What is the real problem? Not a fake problem. We have to understand there are people today who do not want freedom to take place, so you can't find the truth. So they create a fake problem, and then they create a fake solution, and none of it really helps the health of us or our infrastructure, etc. But once you can identify that, now you can get you have a chance at maintaining your health, you have a chance at maintaining the health of the infrastructure, your community, and your society. That healthy, resilient infrastructure gives us the ability to have the strength to fight for freedom. Okay? We have people who know more, have access to more information, they're getting educated more, etc. So these three principles, truth, freedom, and health, have been something I've been exploring as a 4-year-old kid, trying to understand why there was a caste system in India, how my grandmother, who had no degrees, was able to heal people, and that's been my journey. So I feel, frankly, very honored and fortunate to be able to share this knowledge. But this is sort of the foundation: truth, freedom, and health. And you can see how this itself is a system and how these things are connected. So let's now, what I want to do is, let me go over here. I want to now go to the next part here and really look at what is evidence. What is evidence? It's a good question. What is actually evidence? Well, the scientific definition of evidence is something very, very, some people have forgotten, but evidence is, in order for something to be evidence, there cannot be ambiguity. It means evidence is something that is unambiguously predicted. Okay? There cannot be ambiguity. It means that evidence is something that is unambiguously predicted. And I'll sort of give you an example. If you've been, many of you have been watching the climate change, the pro-climate, anti-climate stuff, one of the things that we need to understand is that when you start looking at something like the environment, the climate, by the way, there is no field called climate science. It's a longer discussion. You can see some of my videos. This is something that's been manufactured. Climate science is actually radiative physics. It's fluid mechanics. It's applied mathematics. It's a very complex field, and you have a very complex system, the sun and the earth interacting with two very complex fluids, the atmosphere as well as the ocean. These two things interact, and it's a very complex system because these interactions, when people try to make predictions, if you want to make accurate predictions, that means in order for it to be evidence, it has to be unambiguously predicted. And what you'll see here is this is a kind of stuff that's not evidence, but that's actually published in the climate change report. You can see these are, each of these lines represents the predictions across 40 different models of ice melting, okay, on the Arctic. And what you see is that you actually see that there is multiple answers. There's 40 different answers. In fact, it's almost like the Baskin-Robbins ice cream flavors. There's a flavor of the month. So one model predicts, if you look along the top, that 100% of the ice sheets will melt, and another model predicts nothing else and everything in between. This is not evidence. This is not unambiguous prediction. It's really, I hate to say it, it's fake science, but this is a world we live in today that truth is not being, you can't debate this. There's a thing called scientific consensus, so people move forward. And then this becomes a basis of policy that CO2 is a pollutant. And then all of us are going to get taxed more to support a model, which is a fake model, which it isn't even based on science. Okay? So let's really share that evidence is an unambiguous prediction. So let's now go to the immune system. And I'm not sure how many of the Congress and legislative people or the legislative people are on from New Jersey. Everyone, by the way, I welcome, but we really wanted, because of the vote taking place in New Jersey, we wanted to really invite the Congress people, the Assembly, plus the senators. Why? Because a few days ago, an amendment was made to a bill. There was, just a review, back around on December 16th, the Assembly in New Jersey voted to eliminate religious exemptions in New Jersey. They passed the Assembly, went to the Senate. They didn't have enough votes. So a few days ago, they brought it back to the Senate, and they amended the bill to make it completely ludicrous, which basically fundamentally says, I hate to bring it to this essential point, that only rich people have the potential of getting exemptions that go to private schools. That's fundamentally what's occurred. And on top of that, courageous mothers and fathers and families have been out there protesting. And this is not, again, it's not about just vaccines. This is about the restriction of freedom to control your own body and what goes into you or your children's bodies. So it's really about freedom and the First Amendment. So massive protests. I was very fortunate to go down there. I shared my views on this on the notion of truth, freedom, and health. But we also, that evening, we did a whole 2-hour event in West Orange, where near Livingston High School, where we shared the theory of the immune system. It's also in one of my Twitter feeds. So I want to just review that and give the opportunity for anyone to ask any questions about it. But fundamentally, just to review, the immune system really has two subsystems that it's made up of. It has the innate immune system, which you see on the left, and the adaptive immune system. And just to keep it simple, let me go to these boxes here. When a pathogen comes, it first affects your innate immune system, and then it triggers your adaptive immune system, which then gives antibodies. Now, this is what's known as the current model of the immune system. And I want to emphasize this. This approach is science is what has been used. Someone just said, I hope Fox News, perhaps Tucker will have him for a few minutes, only a few minutes. Well, we'll see. We'll see if Tucker has the courage. But hopefully he does. But here's the bottom line. The entire science to date has been based on this concept of the innate and the adaptive immune system. It's a two-box model, okay? So when a pathogen comes, it comes through the innate immune system, and we'll explain what that is. And that process can occur between 0 to around 72 hours. And then if the pathogen is not annihilated during that process, it then triggers the adaptive immune system. Okay, so this is what they teach in medical school to MDs and pediatricians. And remember, MDs and pediatricians are not engineers. They do not understand how large-scale systems work. Their entire way that they learn in medical school is in a very siloed way. They maybe get one course in immunology, and in that one course, probably in a few lectures, they learn that there's the adaptive and there's the innate and there's the adaptive. A pathogen comes, you turn on the innate system, and then you turn on the adaptive. Okay, this is what MDs and pediatricians learn. So the MDs and pediatricians who are being called on for expertise by the politicians out there need to understand they actually are not experts for two reasons. A, what I'm sharing with you here, this model of the immune system, first of all, is about 60 to 150 years old. okay? It's about 60 to 150 years old. That means that the model that's being used for the immune system is 60 to 150 years old, and it's very different than the current model of the immune system, which is what we're going to talk about shortly. The current model of the immune system is far different than what people are taught here. Okay? So this is something that everyone needs to understand, that this two-box model is literally 60 to 150 years old. So what is and why do I say that? Because this model is the essential science, it's the outdated science that's being used to argue that vaccines are safe. And remember, the essential issue here is if vaccines were 100% safe, proven, then we could say, okay, everyone should take them, they're fine. But the reality is, if you're using a science that's outdated, you have, by its nature, you're not considering all the effects of when you get a vaccine in, and the science itself, that there is going to be risk. And that's what I want to share with you here. So if you go back here, in the two-box model, when a vaccine is given, it's given into the adaptive immune system. And the notion of the vaccine's efficacy, that means that it works, is based on does it upregulate antibodies. And this is essentially the science. You have a pathogen comes through the innate immune system in a normal way, it triggers adaptive, but we're going to give the vaccine to simulate nature to get these antibodies. So just to review, what is the innate immune system? Well, the innate immune system is when you get a pathogen, it is coming through your skin, your cough reflexes, your tears, your mucosal layer, your stomach acid, and your gut. And then there are various cells involved in there, the monocytes, the macrophages, the neutrophils, the NK cells, and dendritic cells. So simply put, if I were to sneeze on you right now and I had measles, that, first of all, would go on your skin, it goes into your eyes, maybe into your mucosal layer in your nose, your respiratory system, and then your innate immune system is in these physical areas of contact with the outer environment, and then a set of cells, these monocytes, macrophages, neutrophils, NK cells, dendritic cells, they're like infantry. They literally go start attacking whatever was in my sneeze. Okay, sorry to be a little disgusting here. And that's the first line of attack. And that lasts around 0 to 72 hours. And then after that, the adaptive immune system kicks in, where the innate immune system is non-specific. It's one massive attack. The adaptive immune system is meant to be the specific immune system, where it has T cells, T lymphocytes, and B lymphocytes, which are meant to identify the particular pathogen in that sneeze, okay? And then create what are called antibodies to that, all right? So you have the innate and the adaptive. Again, this is the old model of the immune system. And just to get a little more detail, in that old model, if you were to put side by side compare the innate and the adaptive, you see the features of it are primitive and broad. The adaptive is highly specific. That's clearly the word, the specificity. The speed is immediate. In the adaptive, it takes around 72 hours after it kicks in. The regulation is essentially on or off. In the adaptive system, it's literally, it regulates itself. It can increase or lower. Potency is lower on the innate, higher on the adaptive. The kinetics, which means how fast it occurs, are very fast. This takes days, weeks. The amplification is insignificant here. There is an amplification. The duration is short. And here you can last a long time. Once if you were exposed to measles, if you had these measles parties, you're exposed essentially for life for a very, very long time. The theory of the old model was there is no memory to the innate system. This actually turns out to be false. Again, this is an outdated old science, but this is again what's used in medical school by MDs and pediatricians. And the adaptive is, yes, there is memory, and so on. The activity is always present. This is normally silent and kicks in when the pathogen kicks in. It's unspecific, and here it's highly specific. So again, just to review, this is a two-compartment model of the immune system. So any of the legislators listening understand that there's just two boxes here, pathogen, and if you get antibodies, the old model says you're in great shape, and that when you stick in a vaccine through the bloodstream, you're going to check for antibodies, okay? But the reality is that this is actually not true. What the truth is that there are other systems that make up the immune system. So think about if you were to only look at the old story of the elephant, the blind men looking at the elephant. You may know this, it's a very famous story. a king brings in 6 blind men. They're touching parts of the elephant, and the king asks what they quote unquote see. The guy who touches the tail thinks it's a brush. The guy who touches the tusk thinks it's a spear. The guy who touches the legs thinks it's an oak tree, and so on. So basically, if you reduce the entire immune system just to 2 boxes, you don't get the whole picture of the whole immune system. You're only looking at 2 pieces. It's not even anywhere near the whole elephant. And it turns out there's at least one other box. It's called the interferon system. The interferon system is a link between the innate and the adaptive. I would ask many of you guys to go ask your MD or your pediatrician, many of the legislators, if they can even explain to you the workings of the interferon system. It is, again, the missing link between the innate and the adaptive system. Ask any of the MDs, pediatricians, if they can explain the intricacies of it, the molecular systems of it. Well, I'm an engineering systems guy. I have 4 degrees from MIT. My PhD is in a field of called biological engineering. In 2003, MIT created this field because they were recognizing of the big gaps in science occurring in the old biological sciences method, that as we were finding parts of biology, we needed people to understand the engineering, how these parts were connected. That gave rise to a very new field in 2003 called biological engineering. I was one of the first graduates out of that field. And for my PhD work, I built a whole new technology to understand how molecular systems work. But I also studied, at least 50% of my PhD thesis was on the interferon system. The interferon system is triggered by the innate immune system. It actually has memory. Let me repeat that. The innate immune system, portions of it, because of the interferon, have memory. So you have the ability to do what's called viral interference. You get a virus hitting you, these other thousands of genes get turned on, and those genes, essentially with IFN alpha and beta, are able to protect against other viruses. So it's not true that the innate immune system has no memory. And this has been shown more recently, more recent experiments. The other piece of this is that the IFN system then modulates the adaptive immune system through IFN gamma and IFN lambda. And what you also notice is you see this arrow coming back. The adaptive immune system also knows how to turn off the innate immune system and modulate it. This is really important. Pathogen comes in through the innate immune system. The IFN system gets turned on in a beautiful orchestra piece. The adaptive gets turned on, and then the adaptive turns it off. Because if you don't turn off the innate immune system, you have what's called autoimmunity, right? You're always trying to fight something, and you're always you're not modulating, you're not turning things on and turning things off. So the body in many ways is well constructed over billions of years across all of our evolution to be able to modulate all of these chemical reactions. So you're able to build immunity and also turn it off. Now, is this all there is to it? Well, it turns out there's more beyond just this. And by the way, if you look at this, even if you just look at this 3-box model now, what you'll see here is that you can compare. If I get an exposure going through the innate on the right side to the interferon and the adaptive, well, what's the risk of actually being exposed? That's really the fundamental question. And what are the benefits? There are also benefits to being, for example, exposed to the actual virus. Your body orchestrates the innate, the IFN, and the adaptive, turns it off. Your body learns from that. It builds its own innate and adaptive memories from that, and it gets resilient. Well, now there is some risk. In 1963, some people decided that 1 out of 100,000 people getting measles, the innate, the normal way, was too high, which means 0.001%. And based on that risk, they created what is known as the current model of vaccines, because someone decided that risk was too high. But the issue is, if we go back to this diagram, is now we're subverting the innate and the IFN, and we're going down to the adaptive. Well, what's the risk of that, and what are the benefits of that? This is the fundamental question here. And the bottom line is there are no really risk assessment studies for vaccines. They don't know the risks. And that's the issue here. So when you don't know the risk, and when you're dealing with a complex system that has taken billions of years to engineer, and you're going and tweaking around with it, to say that it's risk-free or the risk is minimal when you haven't done the risk is frankly awful science, at worst fake science. Now it gets even more interesting when I go to this diagram. This is something I recently presented at the National Science Foundation. It's when you start looking at all the science that's come out over the last 20, 25 years or 30 years, you start realizing that yes, there is the innate, yes, there is the IFN, and yes, there is the adaptive, but there's something more than that. There's other components here. We now know there's a very rich aspect of our body called the microbiome. The microbiome are all the different bacteria in your gut, and they're at varying ratios, which we're really only starting to understand. In your mouth, there's a whole virome, all the viruses within us, and all of these are in addition to the 10 trillion cells that we have. So we potentially have another 3 to 10 trillion bacteria. We probably have another 100 trillion viruses. It's quite a whole new area. So when you look at it, the microbiome / virome, it interacts with the innate immune system. It interacts with the IFN. It interacts with the adaptive. And the microbiome is connected to the neural system, your brain, the gut-brain axis. You may have heard of this. So at least we have another, 1, 2, 3 other subsystems, very, very complex systems interacting. So you really have to ask, if you go subvert the adaptive immune system, before we just talked about the IFN, you're turning off, turning on, perturbing many of these other subsystems. So if you're supposed to get, if we're in the natural world, we're supposed to be getting viruses and pathogens coming up through the innate, turning on the IFN, interacting with the microbiome, the neural system, all these things react to that pathogen, achieve some homeostasis. What happens when you're actually subverting all of those systems and going right into the adaptive with a virus, which is actually not even the full virus that you would get in the natural world? It is a fake version of it. It's a fake virus, right? Because it's attenuated, it has other stuff in it. That has been, of course, a big controversy, aluminum and thimerosal, mercury, other adjuvants, and the entire risk model has not been established on this. So to mandate that you cannot get any exemptions, religious or medical, it's absolutely absurd. It's against science, but it's also against freedom, because when you look at this diagram here, when you turn something like this on, the adaptive immune system, each one of us has very different genetics, epigenetics. Each one of us eats different things. To assert that you're going to force everyone to get the same schedule of vaccines, knowing that the bodies, our internal molecular systems are very different, and knowing that you don't have the risk assessment, is unfortunately very, very bad science. And more importantly, it's against freedom. So that's what's fundamentally going on in this discourse. The science has been thrown away. I've offered to come educate the legislators, and I know some of them are very interested in that. But those who are blindly voting to restrict, to eliminate the exemptions and not really study the science. You have a gentleman by the name of Senator President Sweeney who has said that the science is settled, but he doesn't know what he's talking about. And if he's listening to MDs and PhDs, I think his brother is an MD, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about because he's not a systems guy. We're talking about the immune system. It's the immune system, and this is what it looks like. And there's probably other parts. I'm even open, to saying that this is not fully there, that there's other components. So in conclusion, when we look at this over here, let me go back here. When we look at this over here, I just want to bring this back to this. We have to have freedom to apply the scientific method so we can get to the truth, and from the truth we can identify real problems and real solutions for the health of our bodies, our infrastructure. And from this, if we have real infrastructure, if we're healthy, we can literally go and, we can literally go and have the strength to exercise our freedom, okay? So that's what this is really about. So in the scientific aspect, and I want to talk about herd immunity, is that A, the science is definitely not settled. B, we're talking about multiple complex systems. C, the science that people are talking about, the MDs and the PhDs, who are unqualified to talk about this unless they understand the complexity of the immune system, clearly shows that one size doesn't fit all. And the science is 60 to 50 years old that was used to build vaccines, no risk assessment, and that's what we're talking about. I want to take a little bit of time to talk about herd immunity, but I want to just grab the phone here and see what people have to say on any questions that they have. I think it's important because I wanted to make this open for people to ask questions. So let's see what we have here. Let's see. So, 1 second here. So let's see what questions we got. So we have people saying, let's see. Science is never settled. That sounds ethically where can we download this? Hold on, let me start from the beginning. Scary that the scientists that view humans as a virus on the earth are also in charge of vaccines. Interesting. This one says, I love your research, but your political party of choice doesn't represent the liberties of the individual. Well, just to let everyone know, I don't care for any political party. 2 years ago, we ran in Massachusetts as initially Republicans because the Democrats would never let a guy like me run. The Republicans were so scared we ran as independents. And we ran as independents, even though we got all the 20,000 ballot votes to get on the ballot. There was only 3 candidates, me and the Republican and the Democrat. They illegally did not allow me on the debate stage because that's how afraid they were. So it's not about Democrats or Republicans. It's the establishment versus you and me. I'm running this time as a Republican because my hope is by getting, it'll be the opportunity at least for my voice to be heard on a debate stage. So again, I don't really care about either party. What I care about is truth, freedom, and health. Next question. If you question medical science while in medical school, then you get kicked out of grant programs. Well, this gets back to the fundamental issue of freedom. We are replacing the scientific method with what is known as scientific consensus. It doesn't matter if 99 out of 100 people believe that the sun goes around the earth, and then one guy has evidence showing the earth goes around the sun. What matters is the evidence and the scientific method. That's why it's cool about science. It doesn't matter about your opinions. Thank you. Love you so much. Thank you for your service. Is this life? Thank you for speaking out and educating and helping to be part of the solution. Hashtag biological engineering. Risk-free is 100% lie. Who just exposed? Go to the banned video. Will the adaptive ever attack the fake virus benefits after it's been rendered null? So the question is, look, I think it's an interesting question because when you go perturb one part of a complex system, the other aspects of the other components of the system will likely try to react in a way to achieve balance. So if you go manipulate the adaptive system when the virus or the pathogen didn't come through the normal way, one of the things that we're able to show now, at least through our molecular systems analysis, is that the other aspects of the system, the IFN, the microbiome, other systems may change in order to react to the thing that short-circuited itself and got in there through the vaccine model. And this may be the cause of some of these autoimmune disorders, right? Because when you look at diseases like lupus or multiple sclerosis, this is where the body is attacking itself because it thinks that it itself is under attack. So we have to look at this area of autoimmunity and how when you perturb one part of the system in the non-natural way, how that potentially turns on these systems when they shouldn't be turned on. Science has never settled. The Elephant in the Dark, Idris Shah book. Okay, apparently you have to start somewhere. You need to come down to speak to Florida. Would love to do so. One of the things we want to do is we want to educate legislators. There are probably 2 kinds of legislators. The what I call the legislators who are sold out, who essentially are career politicians who have no job, and this is a way to build their career, right? So they're just looking for their payday where they'll get money, or essentially looking for power, profit, and control. However, there are probably legislators who truly want to serve, but they have been misinformed. And for those people, we also want to do this. But this is not about legislators. This is really about the broad public that needs to also be legislated so they realize that their freedom is under attack. Herd immunity. I want to talk about that. Thanks for sharing. Good morning. Can vaccines weaponize our immune system against us? Vaccines are an easy in. That's a very, very interesting question. Can vaccines weaponize us against us? So if you look at this model, I want to go back to this diagram here. If you are short-circuiting the innate immune system and going through the adaptive, it behooves anyone who has any type of engineering mindset to realize that the microbiome, the IFN, these other systems are going to try to react to that pathogen in some way to try to balance itself out. And if you don't even have that common sense, then something wrong with you. And this is what's happened. Unfortunately, most MDs and most most the MDs and the pediatricians do not learn a systems approach. By the way, a systems approach to biology is also relatively new, that occurred around 2003. It's a field called systems biology. You look at a guy like Hotez and these other guys out there, they're not engineering systems guys. They know less systems training than the plumber, the electrician, the engineer. And that's the problem. These guys are not experts at the immune system, and yet, the newspapers like the New York Times give them huge spread, but they're unqualified to discuss the immune system, period. We go to the next question here. Human health is a bipartisan issue, LOL. Next one. Dr. Shiva, can you please address the fallacy that unvaccinated pose a risk to the immunocompromised? So let's talk about this. Let's talk about this herd immunity, because I wanted to talk about the big mathematics error that's being made here, which is one of the things I promised to do. So one of the things that's going on here is that if you look at herd immunity, let's discuss where this is coming from. Remember, I talked about sometimes people create a fake problem and a fake solution. If you really step back and you look at what has really improved human health, it occurred when we did infrastructure changes. People started eating better, public education, we eliminated child labor, sewage, clean water, starting around the 1900s. And many of you have seen that curve where the number of deaths were around 14 out of 100,000. And with those massive infrastructure changes, 1 out of 200,000 people were dying. So it went from 14 to 1 out of 200,000, 95% reduction. Vaccines, polio, etc., and measles came in way after that. So these medical interventions had a very, very minuscule effect. It was public infrastructure. And how did we get that public infrastructure? It came from you and I and working people like us, whose names we don't even know, who fought during the 1800s and 1900s, 1930s on the streets, massive protests, because they were being abused by the establishment, the aristocracy of this country. They fought for those things, massive labor movements. That's how we got those changes. Okay? It wasn't medical doctors or Jonas Salk who saved us. This is a myth. Those massive changes took place not from the elites, but from everyday working people who fought for us. That's the first thing. So let's talk about herd immunity. Well, herd immunity is based on promoting a fake science, and it's fake math, because they're leaving out a whole part of the mathematics here. So herd immunity says, okay, there are a small set of people who are immunocompromised. Who are immunocompromised people? These, in the United States, around 1 out of 2,000 people, what are called primary immunodeficient, okay? These are people undergoing perhaps a blood marrow transplant, maybe have severe AIDS, and they're in an ICU. Well, those people, you need to be very careful they're not introduced to people with infections. Even if you give them a vaccine, it could affect them, okay? So the immunocompromised people cannot even be vaccinated. So to protect that 100,000, I think about 170,000 people, 1 out of a 2,000, let's assume the U.S. population rounded to 300 million. So you have about 170, 180,000 people are immunocompromised. To protect those people, the theory is for each vaccine, they've used a mathematical model to calculate what portion of the 300 million need to be immunized in order to protect that minority. So let me repeat that again. 300 million people over here, a small group of people are immunocompromised. In order to protect them, the goal is to vaccinate a certain percentage of these 300 million. The number that was calculated for something like measles first was around 70 or 80%. Well, they found that number was too low. Then they cranked it to 80%, 85, 90, 95%. Okay? So what they're saying is 95% of these people, which is around 285 million people, if you take 300 million, need to be vaccinated to protect the 170,000 of the minority of immunocompromised. Okay? That's the math. Well, what this math, the big math error here is, what about what percentage of people among the 280 million who get vaccinated, what percentage of them are going to also have some type of injury? I don't mean death only, but it could be other types of things that occur to their body from what I just shared with you in this example, that other parts of the immune system get perturbed or disturbed. They may get autoimmune disorders, etc. What is that risk? Well, that risk has never been calculated. Period. It's not been calculated. So there's a big math error here. You've calculated one portion of the people at risk, but you have purposefully not calculated this other portion. That's the big math error here. And what's also important to understand is, from a freedom standpoint, do not these people's freedoms also matter? Now, we also know that the vaccine courts were set up in 1986 because there must have been a risk, and in order to protect the big pharma guys, 1986, Reagan, which is very unfortunate, supported the creation of the vaccine court, which says that you can't sue the pharma companies directly. You must sue in a U.S. vaccine court through the Department of Health and Human Services. And I think close to $5 billion have been paid out already as of today. So we know there's a risk. But the lack of doing the risk analysis on that is a big, big math error here. It's essentially an invisible error. You've just forgotten about it. So that's really the fundamental issue around herd immunity. And the last point I want to make with herd immunity is Poland, who's a guy from the Mayo Clinic, has said even the vaccines themselves aren't working, up to 20% failure even after 2 doses, for example, the measles vaccine. Does the government, through its agreements with pharmaceutical companies, want us to be sick? Well, it could be true, but if you look at it from a pure business standpoint, about $55 billion are made from vaccines. If you read any of the vaccine inserts, they describe all sorts of diseases, and if you add up the sum total of those diseases, what pharma makes, it's probably $500 billion. So that's the economics of that. Wish you can inform CA, our freedom is already taken away. Thank you a ton. Is it possible that some vaccines attack the pineal gland? Well, the pineal gland is interesting. It is, some people call it the central clock of our endocrine system. It is in some traditional systems of medicine, it is known as a third eye. It's a gland that's in between your two eyebrows, but behind in your brain. It does have piezoelectric crystals. A famous Israeli study, or very lesser known Israeli study, found this. But it's known as a central, potentially, clock of the circadian system. It is in the brain. We do know that when one of the biggest areas that we're working on right now is understanding how perturbations of the immune system, like a vaccine, like glyphosate, like other things, it's not just vaccines, how they perturb and can cause neuroinflammation. Well, once you have neuroinflammation, you can affect various structures in the brain. Equality for all kids, thank you for your support. You're a patriot. If the DNC stole nomination from Bernie, make no mistakes how politics work. Doctor, what are your thoughts on spine health? Any scientist wants to shut down discussion inquiry are not true scientists. Well, the spine is very interesting, by the way. There's a cerebrospinal fluid. There's some very interesting data now coming out on the linkages between the movement of that spinal fluid and the movement of brain function. Again, I think the point that this question really brings out is, look, we're an interconnected system. The ankle bone is connected to the foot bone. However, medicine is very siloed. You have an illness today, you may be taken to 5 different specialists, because the old notion of the general practitioner, your local village healer, the local doctor who saw you physically, interacted with you. In the 70s, my doctor would look at my eyes, my tongue. They weren't staring at a computer screen. They would really look at you and appreciate you, and they knew your family history. Those days of medicine are unfortunately gone, and it's replaced with a very reductionist form of medicine. Hi from Essex, UK. Great listening to you. Hello to you, Lunar Sunshine. So do sick people eat profits, and is a strategy for the healthcare industry to make people sick? Well, look, when I've talked about truth, freedom, and health. So one of the things that's happened is the infrastructure of the healthcare system has been subverted by people called GPOs and PBMs, group purchasing organizations, PBMs. Many doctors, by the way, themselves have lost their sovereignty. There are a lot of good people who went into medicine, not to just profit, but because they actually wanted to help people. But when doctors come out of medical school, they have to join medical boards. And the medical boards choke them and they hold them to follow certain protocols and guidelines. So many doctors are also choked. So what you really have is there are doctors who know that there are potentially other cures, but they're not able to easily afford those to the people. It's essentially the entire medical system, end to end, from the educational piece, from the science piece, and from what are called GPOs and PBMs, who control the flow of all supplies into the hospital, all supplies into pharmacy. There's 3 of them, are essentially choking the entire process of medicine, the delivery of it at the hospital and at the pharmaceutical level. Officials in Saudi Arabia are religiously following the CDC. That's probably true. Have they become the establishment? When will you see on Eric Weinstein's podcast? Look, one of the things is we do our own podcast. There are a number of people who've asked, why aren't you on Joe Rogan? Why aren't you on Eric Weinstein? Well, you should ask them. But what I've decided is we've grown our own organic Twitter followers. Everyone should sign up, because it's unclear to me, are people, many of these people who have a certain podcast, enormous following, are they ready to hear authentic stuff from a real scientist? Because many of them are so enamored by celebrities, so enamored by the establishment, that it's hard for them to really bring in someone like myself or you out there who actually have real data and can connect the dots. It may, in fact, be difficult for where they're getting money from. Thank you, Dr. Shiva. The virus are feeding on the toxins, then eliminates, and then they feed on the toxic waste. Do all countries develop vaccines in the same way? Why does prednisone, aka adrenaline, work as the only cure for my all-over body eczema? Vaccine shed. Okay, so there's a bunch of issues here. First of all, the development of vaccines, there's a primary set of companies, the Mercks, the Sanofi's, the big pharma companies who are primarily involved in vaccine development. Some of them outsource parts of their vaccine development to various other companies throughout the world. One of the interesting things is, if you look at the entire supply chain of vaccine development, it's a very complex engineering system. When you build an airplane, again, a very complex system. It's an engineering exercise. From the end-to-end development of those airplanes, even the Boeing 737, in spite of all the things that they put in, you still have airplanes falling out of the sky. Well, vaccines themselves go through a very, very long, complex development process. But the issue is the components of them are coming probably from places like China, India, etc. And each one of those processes, the risk assessment of that entire process does not exist, and it's not made easily apparent. When you develop a drug, for example, it has to go through a very stringent clinical process. Same if you build a biomedical device. But vaccines have obviated that process. This is something people need to know. Even though vaccines are a product of biological engineering, just like an aircraft is a product of aeronautical engineering, or a biomedical device is a product of biomedical engineering, vaccines have not been held to those same high standards. Someone said, why does prednisone adrenaline work as the only cure for all over body eczema? I have not studied it, but many of the skin disorders, I can tell you, are inflammatory responses. So your body is going under some type of inflammatory response. It's something that my team at Cytosolve can study. As you know, I run about 3 companies. One of my companies is called Cytosolve, where we model molecular pathways. We do know in some of the skin work we've done in animals, there's a set of pathways, the cornified envelope, there's a set of pathways that are involved in oxidative stress. When your body's under stress, and all of us vary, you will get inflammation. You don't have enough oxidative power to do that. So I would encourage you to explore, and maybe we'll do a whole research project on eczema itself, but I would encourage you to explore the whole area of antioxidant therapy, also the whole area of foods, potentially. What are the inflammatory foods that you're taking into your diet? My girlfriend says that she found that pet dogs that were vaccinated outlived ones that dogs. Wait a minute. My girlfriend says that she found that pet dogs that were vaccinated outlived ones that did. Okay. Please send me the study. I'd love to see it. Dr. Shiva, bigger concern should be fluoride in water. Okay. Let's see. I think let me see. I'm having a little bit of stuff with my phone because I'm getting so many things here. Let me say. Oh, there we go. Skin orders, check your vitamin D. Cytosolve, sun will cure skin disorders. Is there a hint of eugenics incorporated into vaccines when there's international cooperation? Thoughts on parasites and their relation to the assaults in the immune system? Are animal vaccines made differently? Can we definitively say that unvaccinated pose no risk to others? If so, what should be our headline? Okay, and what is the epigenome not studied with relation to illness? It's interesting. Joe Rogan had Peter Hotez on, who is an MD, PhD. Well, I'm a PhD out of MIT. Joe, if you're listening, you should put me on so I can share with you all the fallacies of the way that Hotez is approaching the immune system. He's taking a reductionist approach and is frankly not an expert on the immune system. Just looking here. Anyway, a lot of very interesting questions and notes. What is the epigenome not studied with relation to illness? So I'll answer this in the interest of time. Take about 2 more questions. What is the epigenome? It's a great question. In 1950s, we discovered DNA, and we discovered starting in 1990. And the theory, by the way, when DNA discovery took place, they developed a thing called the central dogma theory. So it said, here's our DNA, and DNA creates what are called messenger RNA, and messenger RNA creates protein. So you have DNA, which codes for messenger RNA, and that messenger RNA then transcribes proteins, okay? Translates and transcribes into protein. So you have this gene, which makes this protein, okay? That was called the central dogma theory, which was just unidirectional. And in 1993, we started the Human Genome Project, and the goal was to discover how many genes does a human being have. We knew a worm had around 20,000 genes, and in 1993, when we started the Genome Project, we assumed we must have about maybe 500,000 or 1 million genes. Well, when the Genome Project ended, I don't know if I have a slide here, when the Genome Project ended, it turned out that we only have roughly about 20,000 genes. So this flipped biology on its head in a very profound way, because people realize that we are not our genes. We have the same number of genes as a worm. And that changed biology in a very significant way, because it said that, I don't have that slide here, but it basically said that we have the same number of genes as a worm. So genes are not who we are. So that fundamentally changed the central dogma theory of Watson and Crick, which said that genes create messenger RNA, which create proteins. And so we realized that's probably not this model of a unidimensional model, this box, 3-box model. It actually turns out it's much more complex, that genes can actually be turned on and off, and that there's a phenomenon called epigenetics. So even though you may have a gene for a particular disease, that it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get that disease, because there are other factors which can intervene, literally affect the DNA's coding of those particular proteins and turn them on and off, which could be diet, which could be things in the environment, etc. So it's a much more complex thing, which basically means there's a lot more freedom here, that you're not your genes alone. So that was around 2003, and that came to the field called systems biology, and the big notion of epigenetics came. Well, more recently, in the last 5 years, something even more interesting has taken place. When you look at the entire genome, the 20,000 genes that they discovered is out of 98, that only represents 2% of the genome. Let me repeat that. The 20,000 genes that were discovered only represent 2% of the entire genome. So up until 5 or 7 years ago, the other 98% was considered like useless, like dark matter in some sense. Well, recently what we found is that 98% is not dark matter. That also contains genes, but they're not protein coding genes. They actually code for other types of RNA. So the old model was you have genes which code for messenger RNA, mRNA, which then codes for protein. The new definition of a gene is something that codes for RNAs. And those RNAs could be messenger RNAs, which could be protein coding, but they could be other types of RNAs. Silencing RNAs, which actually turn and turn off genes. So what we're finding is that it's much more complex. So this is the molecular systems level. That's why I keep coming back to this diagram. This is an engineering systems problem. And when we built vaccines, using this old model, which is the old model over here, okay? Think about this model and think about this model. Look at the difference, this and this. I should put a before and after picture. And we're just starting. We're like at the bold, we just started scratching the surface. So it's amazing that you have a guy like Sweeney or other legislators who are literally taking sound bites from a guy called Peter Hotez or these scientists who don't even understand the body as a system. Okay? Engineers, we appreciate the body of a system and we have a humility towards it. But MDs and pediatricians, nice guys, don't get me wrong, but their training teaches them to be in little silos. They're taught to just look at the elephant tusk or the tail. We as engineers have to consider the whole body as a system, or any system we do. And even then we know we can make mistakes. So this is a fundamental problem with medical training. They don't treat it from an engineering system, and they wear their little white jackets. We've put Jonas Salk on a pedestal, and medicine has this aura of a godlike aura, when in fact, the real people who actually understand the body are going to be engineers. A plumber understands your house as your plumbing system, your electrical system. Everyday people work with their hands and build stuff. It's common sense to us that you go stick in a vaccine and you short circuit something, you're going to cause other problems, okay? This is common sense. And we have to, as a people, recognize, and I think people with gut instinct already know this, but the legislators don't need to know this because some of them get paid off. The MDs and the pediatricians, they're just there churning away, trying to put out fires all day long, so they don't understand the body as a system. But that's fundamentally the issue that we have here. The reality is that the immune system is a system. It's not just some connected group of parts. It's a very, very complex system. So let me, in the interest of time, if there's any other questions, I'm going to end. What I'd like you to do is invite all the legislators, whether in New Jersey, Massachusetts, everywhere, to participate in these. I'm going to be doing another one at 7 p.m. I'll also have 2 scheduled for tomorrow for people to participate in. Let me know if you want me to teach anything else. But we need to really educate people how the ankle bone's connected to the foot bone. And for all of those who attended, I appreciate the opportunity to serve you. And I look forward to doing this next session at 7 p.m. Thank you.